In 1914, a young suffragette, Mary Richardson, stormed into the National Gallery in London and destroyed a famous painting, the one on the left, the Rockabye Venus by Diego Velázquez, with a hatchet. Her goal, her idea was to protest against the imprisonment of Emily Pankhurst, the famous suffragette leader who was in hunger strike in prison at the time. But what she did, she didn't actually destroy the image, but even though she was not an artist, she kind of created a new image by her vandalizing act. And by doing so, totally kind of turned the meaning of the original painting upside down. So Velázquez's famous painting is kind of an embodiment of the male gaze, and also because Velázquez is a canonical painter, and the painting being in the National Gallery, kind of a representation of the institutional representation of femininity. And so Richardson kind of created the slashed Venus, which is more a representation of the wounded heroine that kind of represented the fate of Emily Pankhurst in prison, but also of the fate of women at the time, how she saw it at least, or how the suffragettes saw it at the time. Let aside the question of whether we appreciate bringing hatchets into art galleries or doing illegal things altogether. I think it's a very masterful example and a very effective example, actually, because the image of the slashed Venus was represented by newspapers all over Great Britain hundreds and thousands of times. There was no social media at the time, but the dissemination of this new creation of meaning worked very well through the established media. So a very, I think, effective and masterful way of using art for political activism. And that's the topic I'm going to talk today. As Melanie already wonderfully said, I'm a political historian. I study a lot of political communication forms that are not necessarily very appropriate or very positive forms of political communication, such as propaganda, but also terrorist violence. Today I'm going to talk about some little bit more creative forms, art as a form of political activism. And I want to focus on one particular movement, the Situationists. I don't know who of you have heard of the Situationists before? Okay, that's interesting. I expected a little more. I know they're not necessarily the most famous art movement, but nevertheless, since we're here in a very creative community. So I'm going to then say maybe a few words more about the Situationists. It is an art movement that originated in Paris, was headquartered in Paris, but included a lot of people or artists from the Netherlands and Belgium, some Germans as well. They got institutionalized in 1957 as the Situationist International. They had a magazine as well, a monthly magazine, the Situationniste International. Their main idea was to create situations, as the word says it already. So the idea of creating situations for artists to leave the closed artist spaces and go into potentially open urban space, the everyday space of the city, and create at specific places in the middle of society for some specific time, temporarily, a situation. So what did they mean with situations? Maybe I'll use an example of Guy Debord, who was one of the main thinkers and one of the main artists of the movement. One of his early work was a film that that premiered in Paris in, I think, 1952. Hurlement en faveur de Sade. And what he did, and the audience did not expect, the film was just a projection of a white screen with some text fragments, and then interrupted by increasingly longer periods of just black sequences. If the black sequences turned to a length of 2 minutes, the audience revolted, started throwing things, and the screening had to be ended. And that was kind of intended by Debord, he wanted this protest, this tumult to happen with the idea of bringing the audience into the art, of making the audience part of his artistic vision. So the Situationists soon went out of like even closed cinema spaces and actually into the streets of Paris and other cities. But the idea was to create these situations that had people think. Particularly, they started to have them reflect on the conditions of their life and see that different experiences, different sensations were possible. So in the beginning, it wasn't really actually a political movement at all. It was about art practice and about art theory. But increasingly, they started to mix that. Debord and other leaders of the Situationist International started to mix it with revolutionary theory. They saw their societies in the 50s and 1960s as kind of in a stage of late capitalism where everything gets consumed by the production, by capitalist reproductions, and there were no more genuine sensations and experiences. And they wanted to show the opportunity to break through this void or through this malaise and create new possibilities of experiences and sensations. And obviously with the intent of a more broader social revolution in mind. And from art theory, they went eventually, as the 1960s went on, to concrete political activism and trying to use this technique of the situation. And that's why I bring the example not so much for their political ideas particularly, but as I think a maybe interesting concept or tactic of how arts can be integrated into political activism. They started to integrate it into more concrete political activism. And also thinking about concrete medias and means to do that. So that was a little fast, but never mind. As the 1960s went on in Paris, there were student uprisings happening, and the Situationists became a very important component of these student protests in the 60s and later 1960s. They started in Strasbourg in the Alsace region in 1966, and actually they started by the Situationists taking over the local student body at the university. And the first thing they did was they used the whole cash that the student representation had on a bank account to print 10,000 copies of a very obscure Situationist treatise about the malaise of student life, and created kind of an uproar, and then that kind of then unrolled a semester of protests with tomatoes being thrown at professors and a lot of billboards and graffitis and so on and so on. But it was kind of a sign that the Situationists would become like a driving force of the student revolt that then went to the Sorbonne and eventually culminated. I had the image on the last slide, I was a little bit too fast here, in the May 1968 protests that then also involved workers, and there were general strikes and factories being taken over by workers, where again, so the Situationists had moved now to concrete political activism using medias, particularly such as comics, billboards, posters, graffitis, and other medias to use there to create situations and activate people to protest. So I think for us to take out, or as a potential inspiration that can be applied today, there are two interesting concepts that the Situationists developed. One was the concept of the dérivé, perhaps translated as derivation or drive or drift in English. And the idea was developed that you would kind of stroll through urban space, walk around cities with no particular goal or intent except the whims and desires that were provoked by the neighborhood or the urban environment. And so it was seen as a revolutionary practice by the Situationists because for them they saw it as a way to evade or fight this increasingly monotonous and boring, predictable everyday life in as they saw it, late capitalist societies, and find new ways of experiences and in experiencing the city. Probably interesting for us is the output. A lot of these derivs were turned into maps. This is a map by Debord himself from a deriv in Paris, where he kind of only left those parts of the city that were essential for him, or that he considered essential and were to be maintained, and left out all the rest, which he just saw as kind of in-between spaces that are negligible and mutable. And for him, those were basically the spaces of capitalist reproduction, as he saw it, as that he bleaked out and left those places where he actually experienced true sensations. So that's why I called it the naked city. Naked in the sense of void of capitalist places or places of consumerism. But again, it's not so much interesting, I think, for necessarily for the political content, but perhaps derivs, by the way, are still being reproduced today. Apparently, London occasionally hosts derivs, and also obviously today there are also apps, a couple of apps that you can download and then organize or do a deriv with your friends. It should be supposed to be or conceived as to do alone. Anyway, so I think these maps maybe are a mean to think of city and urban space in a different ways, and today are being or could apply today for activist purposes in what might be called counter maps, maps that in the sense of in leaning to, inspired by the naked city, show us urban space in a different way that might subvert the way that we usually would think about the city and how cities would be represented. That might be one thing to take out of the deriv for today, but also the larger meaning was that, or the larger idea for the situationists was that, okay, perhaps sometimes they were a nice pretext to do a bar stroll and get drunk, but they had technically also a broader meaning for them, because they saw it as a means to do what they called psychogeography, so to explore the terrain and see how the urban geography, whether consciously organized or not, actually impacts the emotion and behavior of individuals that live there. So that's a very important thing, because I think that's the foundation to then actually be able to do or create these situations in the urban space. So explore the psychogeography of neighborhoods, of local places. And that would create the basis of, I think, the concept that's interesting, particularly for us today, the détournement. How would we translate that in English elegantly? Maybe determined, I don't know, I don't think that's a good word. Diversion, I think. Diversion is probably the best translation. So the idea of creating these situations in the terms, think of Mary Richardson again, even though she was not a situationist, but using or subverting existing forms, existing artifacts, and in a way that would reveal the potential for change in the present. I think that's really the essence of the détournement. So you have a piece of, you have a creative product, whether it's a piece of art or an advertisement or a design or just some artifact, and you're working with that. You're not destroying it, but you're creating a new creation on top of it that would turn the meaning, the original meaning, upside down, in the sense of the slashed Mary in the beginning. That's really the idea of the détournement, and the situationists really work with posters, in urban space, with posters, with billboards, with graffitis, with comics, and other artifacts that happen to be in the urban space. Yeah, this is a favorite comic. Again, I had it. I showed it earlier in a broader piece. It's originally a 4-page comic. I don't want to go into the details, but it's interesting. It's a very iconic representation of the situation. It was actually part of the Strasbourg protests in 1966, and on one hand, it kind of showcases the ideology of the situationists, but the imagery, the graphics really are a representation of the idea of détournement, because they're using a still of at that time famous Western movie, which they saw as kind of as a foil of empty capitalist, mindless entertainment, and superimposed a dialogue, a philosophical dialogue from a situationist, female situationist author. I don't want to go into the details here, but maybe show some more concrete street applications. So this is now already post-situationist. So the situationists, they wrote a lot of treatises, they wrote a lot of theory about the situation, they explored the psychographic geography, but they didn't actually do that many situations, concrete situations in urban space. So they were more talkers than doers, and I think it's more interesting to maybe get inspired by their conceptual thinking. But shortly after them, there's some interesting applications, I think. There's the Bugger Up in Australia, the billboard using graffiti against unhealthy promotional products. A combination, a group in Australia of subvertisers, as they called themselves, subversive advertisers. So they used big billboards that were already in public space, as this Marlboro ad in Sydney, I think it was, and used graffiti to subvert the meaning of these advertisements. They targeted alcohol, tobacco, but also Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola ads all through Australia. So it spread to Australia. It wasn't a closed group, but more kind of an open collective. If you were signing with Bugger Up, then you were part of. Then you were, and kind of like really taking up a lot of the concepts of the situation, of the détournement theory of the situationists, working with the same media, billboards, graffiti, creating these situations in open space where you create a new artifact out of an existing design to completely turn its meaning upside down and subvert it and show potential for change. This one is a good one, I think, too. The situationists had done a lot of experiments with street sign appropriation in Paris, and this is a new version of that. Some of you might remember that in 2018, the Washington Post journalist Khashoggi was murdered by representatives of the regime of Saudi Arabia in Turkey and in Istanbul, in the consulate there. And there was a lot of protest, particularly in the US, because he happened to live in the US. I'm not sure if he was a US citizen at the time, probably not, but he used to live there and was a journalist for the Washington Post. So there were a lot of protests there. And one, I think, was kind of trying to create this situation, subversive situation, by renaming the street in front of the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C., the Khashoggi Way. I think it was up there for a few days. So yeah, by the temporary situation, and I think also kind of taking up this idea of converting street signs that was experienced or explored already by the situationists. The situationists also explored a lot or did a lot of experiences of misappropriating the inscriptions of public monuments. So that might be a point of intervention that's a little bit more creative to protest these days against post-colonial monuments than just destroying them, but that's just a side thought. And then I think Pussy Riot really is a great case of working with the principles, actually creating these situations in urban space for a certain amount of, for a short ephemeral amount of time, and turning upside down, subverting the meanings of places. So this is one of the early actions. Putin peed his pants. This is on Red Square in Moscow in 2012. At the time, Putin had established his authoritarian rules, and the Red Square in Moscow really is the symbol of authoritarian rule in Moscow. This is a kind of an elevated rock on the Red Square, kind of a half barrel in shape. And it's the place where the Tsars back in the days used to read their decrees, the ukaz. So it's kind of really the place, the heart of authoritarian Russia. It's also the place where people were executed, as long as there were executions in Moscow. So it's a very symbolic place. It's also a place where in 1968, 8 very brave dissidents used to protest against the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia. So it's not an accident that there were 8 Pussy Riot women on the place, on the rock. They were referencing deliberately the protest in '68 against the Soviet military invasion in Czechoslovakia as well. So they're turning this upside down and making it into a site of democratic and feminist resistance. Again, the flag is showing the Mirror of Venus, brings us back to Slasher Mary and the Velázquez Rockabye Venus. Maybe another example that's better known is the punk prayer. Also in 2012 in the cathedral in Moscow. You've seen this video before, probably, you know. I think altogether they managed to do their performance for 2 or 3 minutes, but it's enough. And thanks to the video that they were able to make and get out, the situation was also spread widely. Again, like subverting at that point a very important symbol of the authoritarian rule. In 2012, the Orthodox Church had officially aligned and supported Putin. The Patriarch of the Church had called Putin's rule a gift of God. And officially, spiritually sanctioned him as the legitimate ruler of Russia. They after the performance on the Red Square, they took on the other major symbol of the authoritarian and repressive, increasingly repressive rule of Putin's Russia. With this action. And I think what you see here, and that's again deliberate. I can think back at Guy Debord in 1952 in the Paris cinema, where he deliberately provoked a riot against his own movie. It was certainly intended that eventually the guards in the church would kind of become part of the performance. Now they're becoming part of the situation by trying to catch them, and they're like retreating, and the guards try to get them, and then they go to the side, and it's almost like a folk dance at some point between the guards and the Pussy Riot activists. In another Pussy Riot case, I think this is even more obvious. In 2014 at the Sochi Olympic, they performed a song, Putin Will Teach You to Love the Motherland, in front of the Olympic rings in Sochi. And that led to security guards that were also kind of funnily dressed to go on and whip them in front of the camera that they were running. So kind of becoming part of the performance and really revealing the repressive regime of Putin at the time. in front at the Sochi Olympic that he tried to use as a means of propaganda to show the world the new powerful and open Russia. But so at that time, maybe I want to give you, I was talking a lot of conceptual and cases in the last couple of minutes, to give you maybe 3 minutes to talk with your neighbors and think about like what kind of examples you might know or remember that that you came across that have been taking up these situationist concepts into art activism, or perhaps ideas that you have for new creations that don't exist yet. But yeah, give you maybe a time. You can also just use the time to think and reflect for yourself. But if you want, exchange yourself a little bit with your neighbors for 3 minutes, and then close it up with 1 or 2 thoughts. Okay, I'll be very curious to hear some of your thoughts, but maybe I'll wrap up with a few examples that came to my mind in the last couple of months that I think bring the whole thing to the immediate present. I mean, that's from 2016 in Berlin, the Paint Back initiative, which was a group of graffiti artists in Berlin who started to turn swastikas and other Nazi symbols on the walls and in the streets of Berlin into playful images. So turning them into whimsical images like owls and flowers and even Rubik cubes. There's a little video that shows it better than I can explain it. So that was Paint Back, maybe an initiative that resonates in 2025 as much as it does in 2016. And then much more recent is this case from London, the anti-Elon posters. Maybe some of you have seen some of it already. So they started popping up everywhere in London, particularly at public transport stations, at bus stations, and kind of in this meme form. I'm not sure if it's one network that does it or whether at this time it really turned into a meme, but it started as this Everyone Hates Elon group that was responsible at least for the first ones, and they played they kind of obviously like start with this idea of superimposing existing forms and subverting their meaning and being very playful with it. And I think what this example also shows is the importance of humor, and humor, as I think, and satire is a very creative expression, can contribute as well, combined with design and going back into urban space to show the possibility for change. And it also really takes up on another principle of a theoretical concept of De Boer, who said that like the goal of the political or the artist or political art should be to break the identification of the viewer with the hero. To activate him. And no offense if there are any Elon fans in here, but I guess this is exactly what these posters do. And I mean, this one I think is also really masterful. I like this a lot, from the Center for Political Beauty, also from the last couple days, where one of the mastermind behind it explained, and this really sounds like De Boer in the situation, is that his goal is to rewrite or overwrite existing artifacts with new ones, in order to subvert their meaning and to create a new artifact, create a new creation. And here he used light in Berlin that was projected to project new words and in Elon's image to the gigafactory of Tesla in Berlin. I'm not quite sure how long the projection was up, but it was up long enough, and this is the beauty where maybe the concept of the 50s and 60s can be combined with the technical mean of the 21st century in social media. It was up long enough that it could be spread wildly on through social media. Yeah, maybe let's leave it at that with these examples. Want to maybe close with the words of the late Rep. John Lewis in the US, and I think what this form of art really like encourages, or what I would encourage creatives to do is like kind of lose the fear to go out there as well, like Mary Richardson in 1914, and make noise, get in trouble. And trouble is necessary, I think creatives can contribute a lot at the political crossroads that we are currently are. And I guess with that word, we're back to crossroads, and the circle closes. But I mean, I'm open to questions now, but I'm also very interested in hearing what your discussions were in the breakout, and what examples you may discuss, or what ideas you have on how the détournement concepts, the concepts of dérive, and détournement can be applied to political art and creation.